So, welcome to LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've got about 3 dozen clips on a few different topics for what I think should be a pretty good show tonight. As always, this is my weekly broadcast of the best clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the corporate media here in the United States, along with my commentary between the clips. I won't have the usual quasi-news political comedy clips this week because those shows like Real Time with Bill Maher and Saturday Night Live are still off on break, but as usual, I will be using clips from all the Sunday morning news analysis shows on the regular Big Five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News. I'll cover two main topics this week: the continuing aftermath of the police shooting of unarmed black teenager Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, and also the continuing crisis with this Islamic group ISIS or ISIL in Iraq and Syria, including the live beheading or the broadcast beheading of journalist James Foley this last week. And since I don't have any new political comedy clips for you this week, I had to try to find my own comedy in the news shows again, and I think I did find a couple clips that amused me on the topic of race that was being discussed because of the shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, beginning with the way Candy Crowley finally got to the issue of the racism in the system on CNN's State of the Union in her question to Dallas Deputy Police Chief Malik Aziz that you can see over here.
I want to ask you a question that can't be properly answered in the minute we have left, but I have to ask it. And that is, when you look at the statistics for the arrests nationwide, for the arrest of black males, for the incarceration times for black males, for the number of deaths of black males at the hands of police, they're way higher percentage-wise than they are for whites. Is there systemic prejudice in the justice system?
This certainly hasn't been fair, and the statistics would play that out, that some believe it would be a war on black males. I would just happen to believe that there are many avenues to take place as far as diversification into police forces, and that is hiring more African-American or black police force to reflect that community, and also in the command ranks. You just can't talk about hiring. They need to promote within the command ranks.
Malik, Aziz.
Now, I'm not sure about that answer because I don't think diversifying police forces, while it would be helpful, I don't think it really solves the problem. But I think it was kind of amusing, Candy Crowley's question there. Well, we only have about a minute left, but what can you tell me about the racism in the criminal justice system? I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but I find that amusing. And then the second kind of amusing clip is, of course, Fox News Sunday. It always has something to be amused about, I guess. And they also discussed race over on Fox News Sunday in the aftermath of the Ferguson, Missouri police shooting of Michael Brown. And they had two African-American guests on to discuss the topic of race. And they were Reverend Jesse Jackson, who's a longtime activist for civil rights. And then they also had this new conservative Republican African-American darling, Dr. Ben Carson. I think he's from Florida. He's never held an elective office, but some people say he may even be running for president. But what I found amusing was in the introduction, guess how Chris Wallace introduced these two people, kind of equating them, and I'll talk about that a little more after I show you that clip over here.
With other FNS viewers. Up next, the protests in Ferguson, Missouri calmed down, but distrust of the police is still there. Two of the leading voices in the black community join us to debate whether that's the real problem.
Now, I think it's debatable as to whether the Reverend Jesse Jackson is one of the leading voices in the black community. He does have a very long track record, and he marched with, Martin Luther King, and he ran for president, and so I think there is a good argument to be made that even though he doesn't speak for all African Americans, he is a leading voice of blacks in America. But Dr. Ben Carson, I'm not saying his voice has no meaning and shouldn't be heard at all, but a leading black voice in America, I don't know, maybe on Fox News. But I did want to give Fox News a little bit of credit, though, because they did start to look into some of the racial disparities in that conversation. Here's a question that they asked Dr. Ben Carson to ask him about a little bit of the racial disparities in Ferguson, Missouri, both in the police force. I said the diversity in the police force isn't the real problem, and a little bit on the racial profiling and the racism in the arrests in Ferguson, Missouri. And You can see how Ben Carson answered that question that Chris Wallace surprisingly asked over here.
Well, culture is a big factor in our behavior, but Rosa Parks was not guilty.
And on the other hand, and let's take that into account, Dr. Carson, because I want to put up some other numbers if we have the capability. Here we go. Ferguson is 67% black, but on its 53-member police force, 50 of the 53 officers are white. Only 3 are black, and 86% of traffic stops in Ferguson last year targeted blacks. Dr. Carson, you talk about the young, angry Ben Carson in Detroit. If you were a young man living in Ferguson, wouldn't that be a big problem for you?
It would be a big problem, and people in Ferguson and in all the cities, I think, need to get more involved in the process. What percentage of people in Ferguson voted in the last statewide election? I think you'll find it was less than 20% of the black community. We need to get people involved in what's going on. Without question, that will make a huge difference in what goes on. And also, as a young person, the thing that changed me was my mother made me read books, and I read books about people of accomplishment. And what I came to understand is that the person who has the most to do with what happens to you in life, it's you. It's not the environment, and it's not somebody else. Do those things play a role? They do. And if you want to focus on them, you can have a life that is completely controlled by others, but you can take control of your own life. These are messages that we must get across to people. We must reinstill the can-do attitude in America, not the what can you do for me or what have you done to me attitude.
So you can see Chris Wallace there did kind of confront Dr. Ben Carson with some of the racism in the system, and he got kind of that personal responsibility thing that you hear from black conservatives a lot. Although I'm going to show another clip from Ben Carson in a minute where he actually talks about how he had some problems as a youth and might have ended up just another statistic in the system himself, which doesn't quite jibe with what I just showed him saying there about it all being, or mostly being, about personal responsibility. But I also want to show a clip from the Reverend Jesse Jackson over on Fox News Sunday where Chris Wallace did give him a little bit of a chance to talk about the racism inherent in the system. Kind of right after that clip I just showed of Ben Carson, here's what Jesse Jackson said over here.
Well, culture is a big factor in our behavior, but Rosa Parks was not guilty. But the law said colored from the rear and whites from the front. There's a culture here of racial harassment of black people. We're 3 times the unemployment rate in the country. Number 1 in infant mortality, number 1 in short life expectancy, number 1 in unemployment. And so we cannot escape the need for something, since we're talking about broadly, like the Kerner Commission report, where we analyze this very broadly. We were separate and unequal, now we're free and unequal. We must have a kind of White House conference on jobs, justice, and equality. I'm convinced.
Dr.
So they at least, I saw someone in the comments was like surprised that I would give Fox News any credit, but I try to give them credit when they do something that you wouldn't expect based on them being a propaganda arm of the Republican Party, basically. And as Fox News Sunday is one of the places that you're more likely to see them, exhibit a little bit of journalism every now and then. And so you saw there that Ben Carson had to respond to some of the actual statistics about racism, and they let Jesse Jackson talk about racism a little bit. But they also did confront Jesse Jackson on him saying that Michael Brown had been executed. And I thought actually Jesse Jackson did a pretty good job of defending his statement, and I'll talk about that a little more after I show you that clip over, let's see, that is clip number 5 over here.
Let me start with you, and I want to start with how you characterize the shooting of Michael Brown by that police officer. Here you are.
How many times was he shot, and where was he shot, and why he lined the street for several hours? That was a kind of a state execution.
State execution. Reverend Jackson, how can you say that when you really have no idea what happened in that shooting?
What I do know is he was shot unarmed and shot 6 times, and it's a pattern. Whether it was the killing of Trayvon Martin, the killer walked away free, the killing of the Diallo in New York shot 41 times by police. They walked away free. The Oscar Grant case in Oakland, or the case of Rodney King in L.A. At some point, we require and we need to have a sense of justice. All we do know about Malcolm, really, he was shot unarmed 6 times.
Well, there has been a contention, the only point I'd make, that he hit the officer in the face. There are various unconfirmed reports about how severe that was. There's another report that he was charging at the officer. I mean, I guess the question is, if we don't know, why are we declaring a verdict?
Well, it seems to me that the police act as judge, jury, and executioner. And even under the worst scenario, if he had hit him in the face, does that require at a distance? I was that way, but shot about 20 feet. Does that mean you shoot him 6 times, 4 times at point blank range? I don't think so.
So yeah, Reverend Jesse Jackson makes a pretty good point there, that the way that this police officer killed Michael Brown, even if he had been hit in the face, and there's been all sorts of misinformation about whether he had his eye socket broken, the police officer, but whatever it was, it's hard to justify the way that Michael Brown was shot 6 times and shot through the top of the head. And I'm still waiting for all the facts to come out, but I think it's going to be difficult to justify that shooting. And I'm glad to see that Fox News Sunday at least gave Jesse Jackson the chance to justify what he said there. And the last clip I want to show is from Dr. Ben Carson. This is the one I talked about before, where he talks about his troubled youth and how he might have turned out to be in the criminal justice system. Chris Wallace kind of gives him a softball question. It's basically, what about what Jesse Jackson just said there? What do you think about that? And actually, I think Ben Carson gives sort of not the right-wing conservative talking points I would expect, more like he's trying to bridge the gap and bring more African Americans into the Republican Party, or that's my interpretation anyway. You can tell me what you think down in the comment section after I show you the clip here.
Dr. Carson, what do you think of what Reverend Jackson has been saying?
Well, I think the issues are really much bigger than what it's been portrayed to be, and it can't be resolved in a short segment like this. But, I've seen police excesses living in inner-city Detroit, inner-city Boston, but I've seen a lot more situations where the police saved the situation. And I'm not sure that this is a police versus black community issue. As a youngster, I had anger problems also. But for the grace of God, I wouldn't be talking to you today. I tried to stab another youngster with a knife. A belt buckle saved him. Anger issues get in the way. And if you take race out of the issue altogether, and you take a group of young men and you raise them with no respect for authority, not learning to take on personal responsibility, having easy access to drugs and alcohol, they're very likely to end up as victims of violence or incarceration. It has nothing to do with race. So, yes, is there racism? Are there problems? Yes, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. But we need to start looking at bigger issues here. We only have 320 million people in this country. We're on a global stage where we're competing countries with over 1 billion people. We have to save all of our people. They're all precious, and we have to develop our resources appropriately.
So I thought that was kind of an interesting answer from Dr. Ben Carson there, where it seemed like he was trying to bridge the gap, where he talked about the personal responsibility and, it's not really about racism, but he also talked about the racism in the system. And I don't know, it was kind of a middling ground between what you normally see on Fox News in terms of race and, the reality of race. And I'm actually planning on making a video this week criticizing a Fox News story where I think they blamed the unrest in Ferguson, Missouri on the failure of the war on poverty, rather than talking about the failure of the war on drugs, which I'll show Rand Paul briefly talk about in a few minutes. And I really want to talk about this book here, The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, which talks about mass incarceration and how it's targeted black communities and made them, given this legal discrimination against them, and made it possible by labeling people felons for committing these drug crimes that white people also commit at the same or higher rates, but don't end up getting brought into the criminal justice system because of it. And I don't think that was talked about a lot on most of the shows, although there is one report from ABC's Pierre Thomas that I think touched on it a little bit, where he talked about some of those same statistics that Fox News showed, and not just the racial profiling and the stops, but also in the arrests. And he talked about racism a little more, and then he talked about the White House response and what Eric Holder's been doing. And I'll talk about that a little more after I show you that clip over here.
Some stark numbers hinted at what many could see coming. Ferguson's population, 67% African American. As for the police force, of its 53 officers, only 3 are black. Last year, black citizens accounted for 86% of vehicle stops and nearly 93% of arrests in Ferguson. The imagery, white cops locking up black folks. Questions of race and policing so intense, the feds had no choice but to step in. The White House ordering a review of programs that provide military-grade equipment to police. And the Attorney General taking the rare step of coming to Ferguson at a moment of crisis, promising an independent investigation.
The national outcry we have seen speaks to a sense of mistrust and mutual suspicion.
In this case, mistrust over a shooting where the facts still aren't clear. Was Brown shot 6 times by a policeman because he was attacking the officer, or was it an execution, excessive force?
You promised a aggressive and independent investigation, but you can't guarantee that the facts will lead to a prosecution.
We will try to do this as expeditiously as we can. On the other hand, at the end of the day, it's most important that we get it right.
We've been here before. The images out of Ferguson are haunting and familiar. Los Angeles, Cincinnati, Oakland, cities consumed by racial turmoil after charges of police brutality against blacks. Have any lessons been learned? After riots in Cincinnati in 2001 following the shooting death of an unarmed black teen by police, use of force policies were rewritten and police partnered with community groups. Activist Iris Rowley.
We've come a long way from where we were in 2001. Change doesn't come easy. If anyone is attempting to try to reform police department without their community, it's not going to work.
Cincinnati has also tried new technology, officers wearing body cameras as part of their uniforms.
Get on the ground! Get on the ground!
Rowley thinks such tools could help other cities.
Do you have any idea on you?
The body cameras will definitely help to have the checks and balances and the accountability that citizens are screaming to have.
So I thought that was a pretty good story over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos from their reporter Pierre Thomas. And he talked about the racism at the beginning there, and then at the end talked about some possible solutions. One of the things he talked about was putting body cameras on police officers. That's worked in some other jurisdictions. And I think it actually is helpful to have more of police encounters with the public videotaped or video recorded. I guess there's no tape anymore. And I want to show a clip from Face the Nation. Bob Schieffer asked one of the Democrats who represents the St. Louis area, William Lacy Clay, who I think briefly represented me when I lived in the Central West End in St. Louis. And he asked him what he thinks the solutions are, and one of the things he mentions is body cameras on police officers, which, as someone who makes videos, I always enjoy when video is a solution to a problem, and I'll talk about that a little more after I show you that clip from CBS's Face the Nation this morning over here.
But what do you think the first thing that needs to be done down there right now?
Right now is to improve police-community relations. There needs to be a frank discussion about how we change the way the African American community is policed. These people were sworn to serve and protect, and apparently that's not happening here. And so we have to change that dynamic. I think that police should be required to wear body camera. I think that each police car should be equipped with a camera, so that when incidents like this occur in the future, there is no dispute. It's on tape, and then we can sort out the evidence in a clear way.
Well, I think that that's partially true, that video cameras would help to some extent, and I'm always in favor of more evidence of what actually happened so that you don't have to rely on eyewitness statements, which are less reliable. But videotape also doesn't always help or solve the problem. You know, there was, after the shooting of Michael Brown, there was that shooting of the man with the knife in St. Louis that ended up being video recorded, and even though it doesn't really match up what the police officers said about the man being, you know, just within a few feet and holding the knife overhand, the police are still saying that it was a justified shooting, because I even saw Fox News, you know, has had former police officer Mark Furman, who like messed up the whole O.J. Simpson prosecution, why he's there talking about racism as an expert. I mean, I guess he is an expert on police racism, but not the kind of expert you really want on the news talking about it. And he was talking about the 21-foot rule on knives, that if someone's within 21 feet of you with a knife, you have a right to shoot them because they're an imminent threat to, you know, getting to you before you can pull the trigger on your weapon. And I don't know, it just seems, if you watch that video recording of the other killing in St. Louis by police officers, you know, within like 25 seconds of when they pull up, the guy's dead, that, I don't know, it's very disturbing. And so I don't think video cameras are going to solve all the problems, because even if, you know, the beating of Rodney King way back in, what was that, wasn't that the 80s? I'm pretty sure it was the 80s, and that was recorded, and those police officers also got acquitted. You know, even when there's video recording, it doesn't necessarily mean that what you see is what a jury's going to see after they get to hear all the reasons police officers think that they need to be afraid and shoot people. So I want to show you that. I also want to show you a couple clips from Senator Rand Paul talking about the whole racial situation in Ferguson, Missouri. There was a interview, Meet the Press. It was Meet the Press, right? Yeah. NBC's Meet the Press interviewed Rand Paul while he was doing this charity work down in Guatemala, doing eye surgery, you know, restoring the eyesight to poor people in a way that, you know, makes him look good. But apparently he's been doing since the 1990s, and that, you know, I can't fault him for showing that off, I guess, now. But he did several interviews, apparently talked to reporters over the course of several days, and here are a couple clips from NBC's Meet the Press. First, where he starts, this is sort of typical of Rand Paul, where half of what he says I like, or in this case it's the first half, you know, where he's trying to say that race has nothing to do with what's going on in Ferguson, Missouri. That I disagree with. But then at the end he comes around to the war on drugs, and so I don't really know what to think. And I'll talk about that a little more after I show you that clip over here.
Followed. Let's say none of this has to do with race. It might not, but the belief, if you're African American, you live in Ferguson, the belief is you see people in prison and they're mostly black and brown, that somehow it is racial, even if the thoughts that were going on at that time had nothing to do with race. So there's a very good chance that this had nothing to do with race, but because of all of the arrest and the way people were arrested, that everybody perceives it as, my goodness, the police are out to get us, you know? And so that's why you have to change the whole war on drugs. It's not just this one instance. And I don't know what happened during the shooting, so I'm not going to make a judgment on the shooting, but I do know what's happening as far as that you look at who's in our prisons.
It's vintage.
So the end of that answer was like spot on. I totally agree. War on drugs and the racial composition of people in our prisons, it like matches up with the new Jim Crow and mass incarceration. And Rand Paul said some good things about that. But the beginning there about how it's not really about race, that seems more like geared towards the Republican primaries. And that's why it's always kind of weird with Rand Paul, or a lot of times it's weird listening to Rand Paul, because he like both offends you and encourages, or both offends you and also makes you want to support him at the same time, and or his answer like tends to go both ways. And I want to show one other clip where he was actually talking about the militarization of the police, which of course is something that I think is wrong, and that's also something that's covered in the new Jim Crow from Michelle Alexander, about how the war on drugs, and then especially after 9/11 caused police departments to get all this military equipment that they don't really need. And you can see Rand Paul kind of making fun of the militarization of the police in that same interview with NBC's Meet the Press over here.
Homeland Security gave $8 million to Fargo to fight terrorism in Fargo, North Dakota. And I say, if the terrorists get to Fargo, we might as well give up. I say that as a joke, but I mean, it's like, what are we doing spending $8 million in Fargo? What are we doing sending a tank? There's an armored personnel carrier in Keene, New Hampshire.
And at a time when the U.S.
So you gotta love that clip. I mean, there's nothing really to disagree with in what Rand Paul said there. So I thought might be interesting to show you those two clips from Rand Paul. I have one more Rand Paul clip at the end, or in the next topic about ISIS in Iraq, where he talks about Hillary Clinton. That is also kind of interesting. That'll be later in the show. I want to show a couple. Was it 2 or 3 more? Yeah, 3 more clips on what's going on in Ferguson, Missouri. The first 2 clips from Governor Jay Nixon. I showed he was on all the shows last week, and I had a whole bunch of clips from him. Even though he's a Democrat, I was never a big fan of Jay Nixon, I have to say. He was Attorney General when I lived in St. Louis, and he was also in charge of being the proponent of all the people getting the death penalty in Missouri. And Missouri actually put a lot of people to death back then in the late 90s. And I was a law clerk at the capital sentencing office, or the basically the death penalty office of the Missouri public defender system, and I really did not like Attorney General Jay Nixon at that time. And now Governor Jay Nixon, I don't think he's been all that helpful to the situation, and I want to show a couple clips from him. First, when he was over, he was over on NBC's Meet the Press, and which was hosted by Chris Jansing, since David Gregory's gone, until Chuck Todd takes over. I guess they're rotating. They had Andrea Mitchell last week, Chris Jansing this week, and Chris Jansing asked Missouri Governor Jay Nixon if it ended up that there was not a prosecution, if the grand juries don't indict this officer who shot Michael Brown, are there going to be riots? Is there going to be unrest? And you can see Jay Nixon's answer to that question over here.
Under you, and this has been expressed by a number of people, that if there is not a decision to prosecute in this case, if charges are not brought, that there will be more unrest. Are you prepared for that? And give us a sense of your level of concern.
Well, as I said before, we've been working hard over the last 2 weeks, but especially the last 8 or 9 days, to really see progress, and I'm heartened by that. And that's really come from the people here. I mean, the policing strategies and all of that sort of stuff's important. And Captain Johnson and his team on the ground, the Unified Command, have done a great job. But really what's happened is the people of this region have said, we want to speak, but we want to do so peacefully. And I think that transition is a positive transition. They just want to make sure that what has happened over the last 2 weeks is not swept under the rug and forgotten, and that instead it's used to get positive action, not only in the community of Ferguson and around St. Louis, but around the country.
So I guess that was kind of a mediocre answer, but not as bad as some of the things Jay Nixon's been saying. One of the things I really don't like is he sort of like dared Bob McCullough, the St. Louis County prosecutor, to recuse himself, but didn't use his power to take Bob McCullough off the case. And the last clip I'm going to show you from Missouri Governor Jay Nixon is when he's on CNN's State of the Union with Candy Crowley, and Candy Crowley asked him about the St. Louis prosecutor. Oh, and I notice almost all the news people keep calling the St. Louis County prosecutor Bob McCulloch, like they put a K at the end of, and I know as a public defender his name is Bob McCullough, and I've even seen him in recent interviews say his own name is Bob McCullough, so I don't know why none of them seem to get that right, but that is definitely nitpicking. I want to show you what Jay Nixon, Missouri Governor Jay Nixon, said about Bob McCullough over in this clip.
Governor, the prosecutor in this case, Robert McCulloch, has members of the police force. Members of his family work in the police force. His father, when he was 12, was shot as a policeman in the course of a crime. There have been complaints about him, particularly from the African American community in Ferguson, that he cannot fairly prosecute this case. Are you 1,000% confident that Robert McCulloch is the guy to do this job?
Well, he's democratically elected by overwhelming numbers and reelected and
reelected.
But
are you confident in him?
I am confident that with the dual investigations that ultimately justice will be served here. And I do believe that everybody has a duty to do here. I think all the folks around this appreciate fully the pressure and the watch that's going on here, and I am hopeful that everyone is going to live up to those duties and do a good job moving forward.
But
so I was just reading the comments while that clip was playing, and I saw one of the commenters, Amazed Satsuma, said, "Wow, a clip of Governor Nixon not saying there are dual investigations." And of course, his response to the Bob McCulloch question is, well, I'm confident because there are dual investigations. Yeah, that is definitely one of Governor Jay Nixon's catchphrases, is dual investigations. So I guess that's kind of amusing. And the last clip I want to show on the Ferguson, Missouri police shooting of Michael Brown and the aftermath issue is this is Reverend Al Sharpton was over on NBC's Meet the Press and got kind of a probing question from the substitute host Chris Jansing about whether he was acting as a surrogate for the White House. But one of the interesting things about this probing question is nobody, of course, asked him about him being an activist on the scene and being like a player and then also hosting an MSNBC show, because that would be talking about his conflict with MSNBC. So that never came up in the interview. But here is Meet the Press, NBC Meet the Press host Chris Jansing asking Reverend Al Sharpton whether he's acting as a surrogate for the White House and what his role is over in this final Ferguson, Missouri clip here.
Big article on you in Political Magazine this week. It talks about how close your contact is with the White House, how you often serve as a kind of surrogate for the White House. But let me ask you about the president and in the case of Ferguson in particular, race relations in America in general. Is he doing enough?
First of all, I'm not a surrogate. I have access to the White House in every era going back to Lincoln with Frederick Douglass. Presidents talked to those that were leading at that time. Not comparing Mark Morial or Melanie Campbell to Frederick Douglass, but that's nothing unusual. I went to Ferguson because the family, the grandfather called and asked me to come. The White House called while I was there, talked to me, the head of the NAACP and others. So it's not a surrogate, it is a customary traditional role. I think the president, by addressing it twice while he was on vacation, not a statement but coming out live, and yet not compromising the right of the family. Because where I was nervous, because I've been in this a while, I'm not a studio activist or someone in the ivory tower, I've been in this. For the president to go further, then it would be used in a legal context to saying, oh, the president ordered the indictment, rather than letting a process go fairly, but the president governing and saying how we've got to deal, as I'm reading this morning, he's saying we're going to deal with the military equipment and expenditures on citizens. We, in terms of those that are talking to the family and the lawyers involved in these cases, don't need the president to politicize it and give an escape from the criminal justice system from those that need to be investigated and possibly brought into the criminal justice system. So a lot of people talking are not talking to the victims who don't need their rights violated by politics.
We have just a few.
So that was a kind of interesting answer from Reverend Al Sharpton, but like I said, they probed into his ties to the White House, but not really into his conflict of interest being an MSNBC host and also being an activist involved in the story. You can tell me what you think about that in the comment section if that's a topic that interests you, and you can tell me what you think in general about what's going on in Ferguson, Missouri, and how they're handling the shooting of Michael Brown now that it's been a couple weeks. Those are all the clips on that topic I want to show. So the next topic is the continuing crisis, I guess, is what is being termed in a lot of places in Iraq and Syria. The Islamic group, which is called ISIS, which is the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, or ISIL, which is the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, which is a sort of larger area with Lebanon and maybe Jordan in there. And then I guess they even changed their name to IS, just the Islamic State. Anyway, it's this Islamic group that's taken over a bunch of territory, has a lot of military prowess, taken over a lot of U.S. military equipment, like tanks and other stuff. And from some early clips on them that I showed several weeks ago, they may have incorporated some of Saddam Hussein's old Ba'athist military officers in there, which is why they have sort of a better strategic vision. So the clips this week on ISIS or ISIL or whatever you want to call them, the threat was really demonstrated because they beheaded this journalist, James Foley, who they've been holding captive, and then they broadcast it but they broadcast a tape of the beheading on the internet, and I even used it in the thumbnail. It's kind of gruesome. And then one of the other facts about it is that the person who narrated it and maybe did the beheading, I'm going to show you a clip in a minute how it may have been dubbed, but is a British citizen, and I'm even going to show you a clip that he's this famous rapper. His name is Abdul Majid. Let me make sure I get his name right here. Abdul Majid Abdul Berry, this British rapper whose father was an Islamic militant and is now supposedly responsible for the beheading. Or I'll show Fox News has sort of verified he's the leading suspect, but then I'll show the British ambassador says they're not sure if it's him. And then this is going to lead a lot of Republicans to call for more airstrikes, and apparently the U.S. military is formulating this plan for airstrikes in Syria. And that's the other topic here. But first I'm going to show a sort of general overview of the situation from NBC's Keir Simmons, where he talks about the beheading of James Foley and maybe the tape being edited, like I said. And then he talks about how this is indicative of the number of Westerners who are fighting with ISIS and have Western passports, and that's a big threat, and that's a talking point that you're going to hear in several of the clips I show. But here's the first news story from the NBC reporter Keir Simmons over in this clip.
Chris, good morning. The intelligence agencies view this as not just a hunt for the killer of James Foley, but as a race to try to save the life of a second American hostage threatened with death by ISIS. It's made more difficult because that gruesome video has clearly been edited. There appear to be two knives, and one senior official speculated to me that the tape may even be dubbed. But they are convinced a British man is at the centre of it, a man they are close to identifying, raising uncomfortable questions about extremism in Europe.
These are the soldiers of ISIS calling for more recruits.
That this is the land of jihad and the land
Many with European accents and passports that would grant direct travel to the US.
And ask yourself, is this how you want to die?
This is James Wright Foley.
It was a British voice that accompanied James Foley's murder, a citizen of America's closest ally, apparently administering death to a US national on a foreign battlefield.
We have a British citizen beheading an American citizen in Syria in some vain attempt to try and pressure the United States government into changing its foreign policy.
Out of an estimated 2,000 Western recruits to extremist groups in Syria and Iraq, at least 70 are thought to be US citizens, but more than 500 have been from the UK. Half.
So you heard there from the NBC reporter both about the possible editing of the tape, and they're not sure who the perpetrator of that beheading was. And then at the end he talked about 2,000 Western recruits to the ISIS fighting, 70 from the United States and 500 from the United Kingdom, or Great Britain, or whatever you want to call it. And those are statistics that you'll see some Republicans dispute a little later. But first I want to show a clip from the British ambassador, Peter Westmacott, who says that they still have not identified the person who beheaded James Foley. And then he also talks about the 500 British passport holders who are fighting with ISIS over in this clip.
I see that the British media this morning are speculating that we are very close to identifying who this guy is. And you may have seen that my Foreign Secretary, Philip Hammond, said yesterday that we were putting out a great deal of resource into identifying this person. I think we're not far away from that. We're putting a lot into it, and there are some very sophisticated technologies, voice identification and so on, which people can use to check who these people are. But of course the problem goes beyond one horrendous criminal, if you like. We've got more people than we would like. People think that maybe as many as 500 British subjects have gone to Syria and Iraq for this cause of jihad. And it's not a problem exclusive to the United Kingdom. We've got people from lots and lots of Western democracies who unfortunately are misguided enough to go to that part of the region and take up a cause which is a betrayal of all our values.
So there you can see the British ambassador Peter Westmacott saying that they haven't yet identified the perpetrator of the beheading of journalist James Foley, but I'm going to now show you a clip from Fox News Sunday where their reporter Jennifer Griffin says that a high-level intelligence source told her the leading suspect is this British rapper. I also heard him described as a hip-hop artist. I've never heard of him before, but his name is Abdel Majid Abdel Bari, and you can see that allegation over in this clip.
Chris, a senior Western intelligence official who I spoke to this morning confirms that the 23-year-old London rapper Abdul Majid Abdel Bari is in fact a leading suspect in the killing of James Foley, as first reported by the Sunday Times of London. He is believed to be the masked man who speaks with a British accent in the Foley execution video. Officially, U.S. intelligence officials are not commenting. Abdel Bari's Egyptian-born father, who bears the same name, was extradited from London to the United States in 2012 for his alleged connection to Osama bin Laden and the 1998 U.S. embassy bombings in Africa. Abdel Bari's son traveled to Syria last year to fight with ISIS and recently tweeted a photo of himself holding a severed head.
So yeah, Fox News there reporting that this British rapper is actually the one responsible for the beheading of journalist James Foley. And like I was saying before, Republicans have used this beheading of the journalist to hype up the threat of ISIS, and it seems to be working somewhat because there are reports that the Obama administration is now considering these airstrikes on Syria. I want to show one of those Republicans, Senator Kelly Ayotte, was over on CBS's Face the Nation, and she talked about the beheading of James Foley and how it means that we need to defeat ISIS and not just contain ISIS. I can't remember if she calls it ISIS or ISIL, and I'll talk about that a little more after I show you that clip from this morning here.
Well, Bob, obviously in New Hampshire, the brutal murder of James Foley really brought home this week this threat that it presents to us in our country. And what I think is that a containment strategy is not going to cut it. We need a strategy to defeat ISIS. As the Secretary of Defense has described, it's an imminent threat to us. It's not like nothing we've ever seen in terms of the sophistication of this group, the funding, the territory that they control, and we need a strategy that is going to expand the airstrikes, going to support the Kurds further and the Iraqi forces, but in particular the Kurds, get them the military equipment that they are requesting, and also look at supporting more support and enhancement for the moderate opposition in Syria to deal with the sanctuaries in Syria. We have to do that if we want to defeat ISIS, as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said this week. And then I would say also the political solution is important. We need an Iraqi government that's inclusive. We also need Muslim leaders to condemn ISIS, to make sure that they are saying that ISIS has to go. And finally, I think, Bob, we have to address as the Congress where the defense budget is right now, because there's a disconnect with sequester from the threats that we face around the world and the resources we are going to need to fight this threat.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that the last thing Senator Kelly Ayotte was going to say there, and what she said is that she's going to try to get rid of the defense sequester. Remember, there was a deal since the Obama administration, the Republicans could never come up with like a reasonable deal on deciding to cut certain things in the budget to deal with the budget deficit. Instead, they instituted this sequester where they did like across the board cuts some of it in domestic programs, some of it in military cuts. And so you could see Senator Kelly Ayotte there say because of the threat of ISIS or ISIL, one of the things she's going to do is try to get rid of the sequester for defense spending so that there won't be these across-the-board military spending cuts. And I actually saw John McCain say that he and Lindsey Graham were going to do the same thing. That was like the first thing they were going to do in September. I didn't actually capture that clip to show you, but I think that's going to be a Republican talking point. You hear that the threat from ISIS in Syria and Iraq means that we can't cut our military spending, even though they made that deal with the Obama administration. And if you want to see the big military campaign that they have planned, I think the best description of it came over on Fox News, of course, where they have a lot of, I guess all the programs have a lot of connections with military contractors, and I'll show another description a little later, but this is retired General Jack Keene, who's a Fox News military analyst, talking about what this new American military campaign in Iraq and Syria is going to look like to try to defeat instead of just containing ISIS over in this clip.
Role only. The air campaign, it would be designed to deny ISIS freedom of movement and to take away their initiative to attack at will throughout Iraq, and also to destroy their support infrastructure, most of which, frankly, is in Syria. So the strike targets would be in Syria, in Iraq, and they would be against staging bases for troops and equipment, supply bases, training areas for the foreign fighters that are streaming into Syria, also command and control and frontline troop positions. The ground campaign would be Free Syrian Army in the lead in Syria. They need to be robustly armed and equipped. What we're doing right now is inadequate. Second, in Iraq, the Iraqi army would be in the lead, coordinating with Peshmerga, Sunni tribes, and Shia militia. That campaign on the ground would be to defend what we have, but also to conduct a counteroffensive to retake lost territory. The map there shows the two biblical rivers that make their way through Iraq. The one in the west, the Euphrates River Valley, that would be an effort to retake Fallujah Dam, Fallujah, and the towns that surround it. In the north, the Tigris River Valley, to retake oil fields, the Beijing refinery, Tikrit, and eventually Mosul. That counteroffensive would have to be supported by air support. We call that close air support. We would need air-ground controllers to facilitate the use of that air power while those attacks are going on. And also, Chris, we need special operators on the ground to go after and target ISIS leadership and high-value targets, critical infrastructure, and the same. So that's what an air and ground campaign would look like.
So General, are we talking about hundreds of U.S. ground forces or thousands of U.S. ground forces? And is this an effort, if you're going to really obliterate ISIS, is this going to take weeks, months, years?
Okay, first of all, we have been dribbling in trainers and advisors that we've all been observing, and we've got hundreds of them there. I think this is thousands of trainers and advisors. Some of the Iraqi army, as we know, has to be reconstituted. So the fact of the matter is, our forces on the ground, not in a combat role, except for the special operators, they would, I think, number it in the thousands. That's realistic. In terms of the time, Chris, to be honest, no one knows. And why is that? Because we do not know how effective those ground units are going to be against ISIS. We've seen the Peshmerga have some recent success. So Iraqi army units are holding their own out by the Haditha Dam, but that's not a counteroffensive campaign. We'll have to find that out. That will drive how long this takes.
So that's a little disturbing, seeing unknown number of ground troops. I heard in a different clip or a different pundit that I didn't clip talking about maybe we'd end up with the 10,000 troops that Obama wanted to leave as a residual force in the first place, and the amount of time. So unknown amount of troops, unknown amount of time that in an Iraqi military invasion, or not invasion, Iraqi military operation, that seems kind of disturbing. That might be what the Obama administration is currently contemplating. But I'm going to show you one more clip from Fox News where they weren't disturbed by it at all. In fact, you can see Chris Wallace kind of bolstering Senator John McCain as one of the ISIS hipsters, I guess, because he thought the threat from ISIS was cool before anyone else did. And I'll talk about that a little more after I show you that clip here.
President Obama hasn't decided anything yet, and Congress hasn't approved it. We want to discuss that with one of the first leaders to warn about the threat from ISIS, Arizona Senator John McCain. Senator, I want to begin by playing what some of the president's top advisors have been saying this week about taking on ISIS. Here they are.
This is an organization that has an apocalyptic end-of-days strategic vision, and which will eventually have to be defeated. To your question, can they be defeated without addressing that part of their organization which resides in Syria? The answer is no.
We're actively considering what's going to be necessary to deal with that threat, and we're not going to be restricted by borders.
Senator, you've been around Washington for a while. Help us understand what's going on here when some of the president's top advisors are so far out in front of where he is on ISIS.
Well, one hopes that they are, it's a precursor to the president making an announcement of a new approach, and all of us are appreciative of the president's comments about the tragic death of James Foley and what the administration people are saying, Hagel and General Dempsey. But so far, they have not laid out a strategy. The president has got to come forward with a cohesive, comprehensive strategy, not only in Iraq, but also in Ukraine, also in other parts of the world. This is an administration, which the kindest word I can use is feckless, where they have not outlined a role that the United States of America has to play, and that's a leadership role. No more leading from behind. No more don't do stupid stuff. No more tell Vladimir that I'm going to be more flexible if I am reelected, when I'm reelected. The United States, the president has to understand that America must lead, and when America hasn't, a lot of bad things happen. This is not like the earthquake in San Francisco. All of this could have been avoided, like leaving a residual force behind in Iraq, and obviously the challenge is now much greater than it would have been when the president made the decision not to leave a residual force in Iraq, among other things.
All right.
So that's Senator John McCain on Fox News Sunday, also hyping the threat from ISIS and saying some nice things about President Obama, but then going into that thing about him not leaving a residual force, which I've dealt with in previous broadcasts of Liberal Viewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. I even showed a clip of President Obama defending himself and how it was actually the Iraqi parliament that decided that there would be no status of forces agreement, so they couldn't leave a residual force. And I don't want to go back into all that, but I do want to show a few clips of another Republican, this one Representative Mike Rogers, the head of the House Intelligence Committee, also hyping the threat from ISIS or ISIL, or the Islamic group that's currently holding a lot of territory in Iraq and Syria. And while I think they're definitely a threat to the region, I'm a little skeptical about their threat to the U.S. homeland, which is what you're going to see Mike Rogers. I think in the clip I'm about to show, he talks about the number of passports. I think he says that there are more Westerners or more people with Western passports than the news reports that I showed you. The 2,000 Westerners and 70 Americans. He thinks that's too little, and he uses the phrase, what is it? They're one plane ticket away from hitting the U.S. homeland, I think, over in this clip on NBC's Meet the Press, talking to Chris Jansing this morning here.
Real threat. And you saw the very barbaric behavior. And one of the problems is it's gone unabated for nearly 2 years. And that draws people from Britain to across Europe, even the United States, to go and join the fight. They see that as a winning ideology, a winning strategy, and they want to be a part of it. And that's what makes it so dangerous. They are one plane ticket away from U.S. shores. And that's why we're so concerned about it.
But we've heard...
Now, you saw that hyping of the threat from Representative Mike Rogers on NBC's Meet the Press, but one of the interesting things, I don't know if David Gregory had been there, if he would have challenged Mike Rogers. Sometimes he would challenge guests. Sometimes it seemed like some days he would be challenging, and some days he was kind of like more asleep. He was kind of hit and miss. But Chris Jansing, who was the substitute host this week on Meet the Press, actually challenged Mike Rogers' assertion, talking about how the Pentagon said there's no like specific credible threat from ISIS on the homeland, and you can see that over in this clip.
But we've heard the Pentagon say that right now they are not in a position to launch an attack on the United States. Is there any credible intelligence that ISIS is either planning that or has the capability to do it?
Well, I'm going to dispute that. So we know that in the number 2,000 of Westerners with Western passports is low. Intelligence has a very different number, and it's much higher than that. And the very fight between al-Qaeda that allowed ISIS to separate from al-Qaeda in Syria was the fact that they wanted to conduct Western-style operations. Zawahiri, the leader of al-Qaeda, said, no, we want you to focus on Syria. That's what started the fight. So this notion that they were too barbaric is almost laughable, given that al-Qaeda flew airplanes and slaughtered 3,000 people on 9/11. It was all about direction, control of those individuals. What they were saying at the time was, we have a lot of people who have passports that could go to Europe and then to the United States without a visa waiver, meaning they wouldn't have to apply for a visa. The only way we would know is by looking at who was riding on those airplanes, and that might not be enough. And so they were believing at the time that they could be aggressive in that, and they still talk about that. If you know, even their rhetoric is, we're still going to conduct a Western-style attack. And remember, al-Qaeda wants to put some points on the board because they want to be the jihadist organization that attracts people and money, and ISIS has said that they are and want to be the al-Qaeda or the terrorist organization that attracts.
But aren't we, Congressman?
Now, this is a Republican talking point. I've heard that these different al-Qaeda or al-Qaeda-like groups are in competition to see who can be the one who hits the United States, because that will make them the lead organization. But I've actually seen some other analysis that what they really want is to get to fight U.S. soldiers on their own soil in Iraq and Syria. That would be their big goal, is to get U.S. troops on the ground and fight them and show that they can defeat U.S. troops, humiliate them in Iraq like they did before, which is one of the ISIS talking points I've seen. So I think actually the response of this big military buildup in this military operation using thousands of U.S. ground troops and all these airstrikes, that may actually be giving ISIS more what it wants than allowing them to hit the U.S. homeland, which I'm not sure they're actually trying to do. I mean, it's possible. I'm not saying that they wouldn't like to hit the U.S. homeland, and it's not that it's impossible. If there's a terrorist attack tomorrow that's the result of some ISIS plot, that wouldn't be totally contradictory to what I see in the news. But I'm just saying that I don't think that is really their main goal, the way Mike Rogers was saying in that last clip. And I want to show one more clip from Mike Rogers. It wouldn't be complete if you didn't see Representative Mike Rogers talk about the failures of the Obama administration and not doing this sooner. This is, a lot of people have criticized President Obama for playing too much golf while this crisis is going on, and I don't think I took any clips from that. But here's Mike Rogers using a golf term to say that President Obama doesn't get any mulligans, which any do-overs in the Middle East or in foreign policy. And that's the final Mike Rogers clip, I think, from NBC's Meet the Press, talking to Chris Jansing over here.
Gather more intelligence. What do we do now?
Yeah, there's no mulligans in foreign policy. And if you look at the way the administration last year changed the bureaucratic role of our operators engaging in disruption activities against terrorism, both al-Qaeda and ISIS, it's caused a problem. We need to regroup. Again, we are not configured, our intelligence services and our Department of Defense, to be more disruptive. So we have to back up. We need to engage our Arab League partners who have as much a problem and as much a stake in this as we do. They will still cut their heads off and put them on spikes as well. We need to engage them in a more robust campaign against the safe haven in eastern Syria, and again, continue to engage in Iraq. It can't be about the dam. It can't be about an individual who was so brutally murdered. These are individuals who have killed thousands of people, summarial executions, beheadings. They've sold women into slavery, and they're going to continue to do that because they believe they're winning. That disruptive activity is critically important. The president's going to need to change his policy. This is an opportunity for the president to take a step back, change his presidential guidance on how we disrupt terrorism around the world, including al-Qaeda, that has been slowing down. We have missed dozens and dozens of opportunities to take really bad people off the battlefield in the last 2 years.
Are you confident that the United States is in a position to defeat ISIS?
We have the capability to defeat it. We now have to have the political will, and we have to have the policy to do it. We have the first. We don't have the second two.
So that's how NBC's Chris Jansing interviewed Republican Mike Rogers on what the Obama administration's been doing with ISIS in Iraq. And I also showed Fox News Sunday how they sort of hyped the threat and then gave the floor to John McCain. Next, I want to show what ABC's This Week did. They had a report from Alex Marquardt, their reporter in Iraq. He was somewhere in northern Iraq, and he was with Kurdish forces and talked about how we might work with them. And then I'll show a couple clips of George Stephanopoulos interviewing a different Republican, Mike McCaul, the chair of the House Homeland Security Committee. But first, here's the report on what's going on in Iraq from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, their reporter Alex Marquardt, over in this clip.
The front line in the fight against ISIS. On one bank of this narrow canal, Kurdish fighters. On the other, ISIS militants.
You see the building over there?
Yeah. The small structure right there.
Over there watching you.
They're watching us right now.
You see the hole?
Yeah.
He's standing there and watching you. You see the head?
These Kurds tell us they're the best hope of pushing back and defeating ISIS, but need more American weapons and airstrikes. The U.S. has carried out almost 100 airstrikes in support of Kurdish and Iraqi forces. As a result, ISIS has lost some ground, including the prized Mosul Dam. But ISIS still controls an enormous swath of land about the size of Indiana, stretching from western Iraq into eastern Syria. They have hundreds of millions of dollars, heavy weaponry, and their ranks are only growing by the day, now estimated at about 10,000 fighters, including around 100 Americans.
This is beyond anything that we've seen, so we must prepare for everything. And the only way you do that is you take a cold, steely, hard look at it and get ready.
Getting ready now means possibly expanding the U.S. operation for the first time into Syria, where ISIS has its headquarters. The next step in what U.S. officials warn will be a very long fight against ISIS.
And so there you have ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, reporter Alex Marquardt, preparing the viewers for a long fight against ISIS in Iraq. And like I said, I also want to show a couple clips from the Republican they had on Homeland, the head of the House Homeland Security Committee, Michael McCaul. And first he compared the threat of ISIS to the threat against the United States in 9/11, saying ISIS was the biggest threat to the U.S. since 9/11. Talking to George Stephanopoulos over in this clip.
Well, I do think they present the greatest threat we've seen since 9/11. This has been festering for the last year, and now it's culminating with the killing and beheading of an American journalist, which I think is a turning point. The American people, it has sort of opened their eyes to what ISIS really is, the true character of ISIS, how savage they really are, and their intent to harm Americans. And not just my words, but their words will drown Americans in their own blood, will raise the black flag of al-Qaeda over the White House. So they are very intent on not only establishing the caliphate in Syria and Iraq, but expanding that to external operations not only in Europe, but they would love more than nothing else to hit the United States of America.
So there you can see that ABC also had a Republican on hyping the threat of ISIS or ISIL or whatever you want to call them. And I don't know, was the volume on that clip okay? A couple of the shows I had to watch from online sources because this earthquake that was in Napa, and it was kind of close to where I am, and it preempted the broadcast of ABC and CBS. So all my ABC This Week clips and CBS Face the Nation clips are downloaded from the web, and I wasn't able to record them from broadcast. So I think the volume on that clip was a little bit off. Sorry about that. But I also want to show one more clip where George Stephanopoulos on ABC kind of confronted or was a little bit confrontational with Mike McCaul on whether ISIS really is a threat to the U.S. homeland, sounding, at least giving a little bit of a incredulous intonation to his question, not quite as much as over on NBC's Meet the Press, but I thought I would show you that over here.
I would far prefer to eliminate them over here than have to deal with them in the United States.
That's the question. How serious a threat do they actually pose to the homeland right now?
Their focus right now is establishing the caliphate, but don't kid yourself for a second. They aren't intent on hitting the West, and there are external operations, I believe, underway. And the biggest threat, George, is this. Unlike Afghanistan and Pakistan, this is very accessible. We have tens of thousands of foreign fighters from all over the world pouring into this safe haven that's now been established, including hundreds of Americans with Western passports and legal travel documents, which would enable them not only to travel to Western Europe, but to the United States. And then you couple that with their now newly formed alliance announced a couple of days ago with AQAP in Yemen, which is the premier al-Qaeda bomb maker. Now you have a threat to airplanes blowing up and also the traditional sort of Times Square bomber that we saw in New York. So I believe the threat's very real. I think the FBI, Homeland Security officials believe it's real. That's why they sent out a be on the lookout to state and locals for suspicious activity, and particularly on social media, which they're very adept at doing.
So I don't know, would you consider that a challenge from the ABC host George Stephanopoulos to Michael McCaul? There's just sort of the tone of his question there. Are they really a threat to the U.S. homeland? And he went through it. Notice he said there were hundreds of Americans with American passports compared to the 70 Americans I showed in that previous report. And he also talked about this alliance with al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula that's based in Yemen, which I heard a couple people talk about, that ISIS had made this alliance in the last few days. I think Lindsey Graham maybe is going to talk about that. Well, actually, the Lindsey Graham clips are from CNN's State of the Union, and I showed how Fox News and CBS and ABC covered ISIS and the ISIS threat. And wait, I don't think I showed CBS yet, but I want to show CNN, several clips from CNN. First, this is CNN's Candy Crowley talking to Lindsey Graham, and you can see that asks if these ISIS strikes on, or the U.S. strikes on ISIS in Syria that are being contemplated by the Obama administration, if they mean that we have to talk to Bashar al-Assad, the leader of Syria, which he denies, which I think is not really accurate. And I'll talk about that a little more after I show you that clip here.
If the president should decide that something is needed with armed drones, or U.S. airstrikes in Syria, wouldn't that necessarily require some kind of communication with a man that he would like to see not in office, President Assad?
No, I don't think so. I think the purpose of going into Syria is to deal with the threat to the homeland. I don't think we need to coordinate with Assad at all. The goal is to hit ISIL in Syria, their command and control and logistics centers. And as as Chairman Dempsey said, you cannot deal with the ISIL threat in Iraq without hitting him in Syria. But here's my question: what is the purpose of air power now? Is the mission changed from humanitarian relief, protecting U.S. personnel in Iraq? They've characterized this as a terrorist attack, so I hope the new mission is to defeat and destroy ISIL as a threat to our homeland.
Now, the reason I disagree with what Senator Lindsey Graham said there on CNN's State of the Union this morning about not needing to talk to Bashar al-Assad before striking ISIS forces in Syria is that the Syrian government has some pretty serious, no pun intended, anti-aircraft defenses. They could definitely shoot down American aircraft if they weren't coordinating it. And that's kind of the weird thing about this whole policy about striking ISIS in Syria is we have this policy that Bashar al-Assad has to go as the leader of Syria, but we're also going to be striking the strongholds of his enemies, so it's kind of like that scene in the Woody Allen movie Bananas where they ask it, this time is the CIA on the side of the government or the rebels, and this time we're going to make sure that we don't make any mistakes. We're going to fund both sides. So I don't know. I don't know if that really makes sense. And I also want to show that CNN was confrontational with the Republicans who were hyping the threat of ISIS. Here's CNN's Candy Crowley talking to Lindsey Graham about how there isn't really this immediate credible threat of any strikes from ISIS on the U.S. homeland, and the response she gets from Lindsey Graham on that is basically that I'm going to show you, I'll show you that clip first and then I'll go back to the Jack Reed one, but yeah, this is asking Lindsey Graham, and he says, well, basically they're all these people with passports and we have to assume the worst. And that is over in this clip.
And Senator Graham, I am trying to kind of home in on what is the immediate threat to the homeland, because there are a number of people saying it's not an immediate threat, has to be dealt with. It's a threat to the region, but it's not an immediate threat to the U.S.
Well, I would argue that the intel that we've been provided in Congress is that there are hundreds of American citizens holding U.S. passports. There are European citizens going to the fight that can penetrate America by having European U.S. passports. A lot of jihadists have flocked to the area. They've expressed the will to hit the homeland. That's part of their agenda, is to drive us out of the Mideast. Do they have the capability to hit the homeland? I would say yes. It's about time now to assume the worst about these guys rather than underestimating them. They're not the JV team anymore. They're the most prominent terrorist organization in the world, but they're not the only one. They're in competition with the other jihadist groups, and the gold medal will be awarded to the group that can hit America. They're fighting for status with Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, al-Nusra. All of these guys are bidding for future recruits and status, and the gold medal goes to the one that can hit us here at home. To those who underestimate this threat, you do so at America's peril.
Now, I also disagree with that. I think as I was saying after an earlier clip from John McCain, the sort of Lindsey Graham twin in the Senate, that I don't think the gold medal goes to the Al-Qaeda or Islamist group that can strike the U.S. homeland. I think the gold medal goes to one that can draw the U.S. troops into the Middle East and fight them there and defeat them and humiliate them there. As the ISIS talking point, they say they're going to defeat them in Iraq like they did before. And so the Republican policy to draw us in more militarily and put U.S. troops, thousands on the ground and some in the air that could get shot down, I think that's more playing into what ISIS wants than opening up the homeland to attack. And I did show that CNN's Candy Crowley was somewhat confrontational with Lindsey Graham on that, and CNN also had on a Democratic Senator, Jack Reed, and he had a somewhat more reasonable position where he said, we should presume that ISIS could be a threat, but we shouldn't jump to conclusions that they're, an immediate threat. And I'll talk about that a little more after I show you that clip here.
We have heard some amazing rhetoric out of Washington, out of Britain, out of a number of places, calling this an apocalyptic group. The worst threat, that the Secretary of Defense, the Pentagon chief, has ever seen, Chuck Hagel. We've heard this kind of rhetoric before, frankly, in 2002 when we were told that direct threat to the United States was Saddam Hussein. Tell me why ISIS is a direct threat to the homeland, to U.S. territory here in the United States.
Well, we have to begin with the presumption that they could be such a threat, and then we have to carefully evaluate what their capabilities are, what their intentions are. I don't think we can simply dismiss them. But to jump from what they've done, which is horrific, particularly the murder of Mr. Foley, to the assumption that they're going to be an immediate and within days threat to us here in our homeland. I think you don't jump to that assumption, but you don't dismiss it. You carefully look at what they're doing, what they want to do, and frankly, it's in our interest with our regional partners to disrupt and ultimately destroy ISIS because the threat it poses to interest in the region as well as in the United States.
In the Middle East.
So there was kind of a balanced discussion on CNN, and Candy Crowley, I think, was appropriately confrontational with the Democrat and the Republican. One thing I thought that she did that I didn't like, she kind of bolstered the threat from these passport holders based on, the Western passport holders, based on the beheading of journalist James Foley in one of her little transitional introductions or comments, and I'll talk about that a little more after I show you that last clip on the ISIS threat from CNN over here.
My Prime Minister, my Foreign Secretary have been very clear that we're not getting involved in another.
Officials have been warning for months about hundreds, possibly thousands of Westerners in Iraq and Syria fighting for groups like ISIS. But the threat took on stark reality when a militant with a British accent beheaded American James Foley.
Any attempt by you, Obama, to deny the Muslims their rights of living in safety under the Islamic Caliphate will result in the bloodshed of your people.
Joining.
So yeah, that was the intro to British Ambassador Peter Westmacott, who I mistakenly played the beginning of his clip there before playing the Candy Crowley intro, which I think kind of bolstered the threat from these Western passport holders using the James Foley beheading as, that's kind of a nasty bit of video, and it's definitely, I think, makes everyone feel kind of threatened when you see someone in that kind of outfit beheading someone on a video and then broadcasting it. But the response from the United Kingdom seems to be no military intervention and maybe even no lethal aid for the forces fighting ISIS. Maybe lethal aid is like as far as they were willing to go, and that's actually the last clip on ISIS from CNN I want to show, where the British ambassador Peter Westmacott said Great Britain is not going to do anything except possibly give lethal aid, but there are not going to be any British airstrikes or any ground troops, certainly, over in this clip.
My Prime Minister, my Foreign Secretary have been very clear that we're not getting involved in another Iraq war. We're also not supplying lethal equipment at this point, but of course, should the Iraqi government or even the KRG ask us to do so, we would be prepared to look at that. We're not contemplating a direct military action at this point. Of course, we are closely engaged with the Iraqi government, to which we're giving a lot of political support. And like the United States, we're keen to see Iraq governed by a new and inclusive and less sectarian administration. And once that is in place, if the Iraqi government comes to us and asks us to see whether there's more that we could do, we would be prepared to think about that.
You're for.
So that's the last of the clips from CNN State of the Union with Candy Crowley. That's the British ambassador saying that the United Kingdom is not going to have any military action, but it seemed like the U.S. is moving a lot closer to thousands of troops on the ground and a sustained air campaign. That seems to be what was getting promoted by certainly the Republicans and the people with strong military contacts on the corporate media outlets this morning, that there are going to be sustained airstrikes that go into Syria and thousands of U.S. advisors and special forces troops in the area. I don't know if that's, and there was some talk that the Congress may actually vote to authorize it, but anyway, I showed you CNN covering what was going on in Iraq and Syria, and I showed you ABC and NBC and Fox News, and I want to show one CBS clip of Bob Schieffer talking to another Republican. This is Representative Paul Ryan, who was vice presidential candidate in the last election and may be running for president in 2016, and here's how he has his talking points together attacking Obama for what's going on in Iraq over in this clip.
Situation that's arisen with ISIS.
Is the president doing enough? What should be done here? Would you support airstrikes into Syria if that becomes necessary?
Well, first of all, I don't think I'm hearing enough from the president. I get the sense that Secretary Hagel and General Dempsey understand the gravity of the situation. Candidly, Bob, I don't want to hear from the president how he's reacting to events like the Mosul Dam. What I want to hear from our commander-in-chief is that he has a strategy to finish ISIS off, to defeat ISIS. Let's not forget that there are reportedly thousands of terrorists with foreign passports. If we don't deal with this threat now thoroughly and convincingly, it's going to come home to roost. And so, no, I don't think the president has given us the kind of strategy we need. That's number one. Number two, I think we should let the generals determine the strategy. I don't want to be an armchair general and tell you how this needs to be done, but I would reference the fact that General Dempsey did say, to do this correctly, that Syria is going to have to be a part of this equation.
So that's a pretty hawkish position from possible Republican presidential candidate in 2016, Representative Paul Ryan. And I showed you a whole bunch of hawkish Republicans. And remember, I showed you a clip a couple weeks ago about how Hillary Clinton had moved to the right of President Obama on this. And so I want to show you one final clip on ISIS. This is from Senator Rand Paul talking about how if he runs in the general election, he's actually going to end up being on the left of Hillary Clinton. And this is could be a really interesting dynamic in the very unlikely scenario where Senator Rand Paul could actually get the Republican nomination. But here's his position on what's going on in the Middle East and how he is a lot less hawkish than the seemingly likely Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton over in this clip from NBC's Meet the Press this morning here.
The American public is coming more and more to where I am, and that those people like Hillary Clinton, who she fought her own war, Hillary's war, people are going to find that, and I think that's what scares the Democrats the most, is that in a general election, were I to run, there's going to be a lot of independents and even some Democrats who say, you know what, we are tired of war. We're worried that Hillary Clinton will get us involved in another Middle Eastern war because she's so gung-ho. If you want to see a transformational election in our country, let the Democrats put forward a war hawk like Hillary Clinton, and you'll see a transformation like you've never seen.
Well, I found that kind of a fascinating idea. I don't know. Like I said, I don't think it's a very likely outcome that Senator Rand Paul could be the Republican nominee, because I don't think the Republican base is going to nominate someone with those views on several different issues, and especially the foreign policy issue. And it is one of several interesting splits in the Republican Party, and that's a quick clip I want to show you before I get to a few clips on the earthquake this morning. This is another clip of Representative Paul Ryan talking about his new book splitting from the Tea Party Republicans who shut down the government, even though he didn't split from them when they were actually shutting down the government. Now he's saying he was against it the whole time, talking to Bob Schieffer on CBS's Face the Nation this morning over here.
You didn't say much at the time about the Ted Cruz strategy, that is, rallying Tea Party conservatives on the House side to let the government shut down. But here is what you wrote in your book. In short, the strategy our colleagues had been promoting was flawed from beginning to end. It was a suicide mission, but a lot of members were more afraid of what would happen if they didn't jump off the cliff. I guess I would ask you first, why didn't you say that back then?
Because I want party unity. I don't think it was constructive for conservatives to be carping at each other. At the same time, the purpose of that passage is to try and unify our party. I don't think we can succeed if all we do is criticize and define what we are against. And the whole point of that was you actually can't stop an entitlement with a government shutdown. Entitlements like Medicare, Social Security, and Obamacare continue on as is, so I didn't think it was really legitimate to tell the country we could stop it unilaterally in the House. Point one. Point two, the purpose of this book is to show the country that we have better ideas. We need to define ourselves as what we are in favor of just as much as what we're opposed to. And look, I don't like the track the country's on. I think we're on the wrong track. And as an elected leader, I feel I have an obligation to say what principles and policies I would put in place instead to renew the American idea and get the country going.
So that's the split between Republican Representative Paul Ryan and the pro-shutdown Republicans like Ted Cruz, who may also be running for president, most likely will run for president. And then there's the whole different split on who's hawkish on foreign policy that you saw with Rand Paul. So I thought that was an interesting set of clips to play for you. And before I finish up the show, which is going on longer than I expected, but I want to show you a few quick clips on this big earthquake, which was in Northern California. You know, I live in Northern California, in Sacramento. We got just a little bit of shaking from the earthquake, but I'm going to show you a clip that shows how close Sacramento is to Napa, the place where the earthquake was pretty much centered in Northern California, and then gives you sort of a preliminary report on the damage from ABC's This Week, their reporter Ryan Owens, and you can see how he talked about people were jolted out of bed, and then showed a picture of California with Napa and Sacramento on it, so you can see where I am in relation to the earthquake over here.
Good morning to you, George. Yes, this was a sizable quake, and boy, did it jolt people right out of bed at 3:30 this morning. The epicenter in Napa, California. That's wine country north of the San Francisco Bay Area. No reports of deaths or serious injuries at this point, but there is plenty of damage. Witnesses report a whole lot of broken glass. They say in downtown Napa, you see some of that video there, a lot of storefronts broken, things like that. Among the most significant damage we've heard about is a fire at a mobile home park. The quake, we understand, caused a water main break, so firefighters do not have the water they need to battle that blaze. About 15,000 people right now without power. And as you mentioned, this is the strongest quake to hit the Bay Area since the Loma Prieta quake in 1989. And that one, George, killed 63 and injured almost 4,000 people. One last note, this event is not over yet. There have been almost 24 aftershocks, most of them minor, but George, these things have a way of keep coming.
And yeah, that was one of the early reports. Notice he said there were no serious injuries, but there have been several serious injuries. There was like one pediatric serious injury, and then there were a couple adults last time I checked, and I'm sure that will be increasing as more people check in. And I also want to show you the report from CBS's Face the Nation talking about the damage. This is a little more extensive than was on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. This is their reporter, Juliet Goodrich, talking about the damage in Napa here.
Well, good morning to you. Yes, I wanted to just show you some of the damage. We are in historic downtown Napa, Bob, and this is real close to the epicenter. This really shook us in the middle of the night. A 6.0 magnitude earthquake. They're calling this the South Napa earthquake. This is one of the buildings you can see in this downtown area. This happens to be a law office, and you can actually see structurally, emergency personnel are telling me that this building could actually go at a moment's notice. There are fires in the area, some mobile home parks, reportedly now fire crews attending to them. So this is pretty devastating. And now at first light, we're really getting a look at all of the damage. A lot of people in the area are milling around, but of course emergency personnel now are telling people just to clear away because these buildings are collapsible and it's very fragile right now. Well,
so yeah, some of that looked kind of nasty. I've lived through some earthquakes, never any that strong, at least not that close, but we did feel it a little bit here in Sacramento. I was asleep at the time, so I can't say I felt it. And I want to show one more clip. This is sort of the latest clip from the shows I cover, CNN State of the Union, Candy Crowley. They showed a bunch of more pictures of what happened in Napa while talking to this information officer for the California Fire Agency, who also happened to live in Napa, so talked about her own personal experience and what she saw while they showed some more video of the damage in the background here.
Yeah, it was pretty significant. I've been to a couple down in Southern California in my lifetime. This was very significant shaking. I would categorize it as violent shaking, followed by the undulating, rolling sensation, and it seemed to last quite a long time.
Wow, and I know it's just beginning to be daylight here. We're now on our screen beginning to see pictures of fires, which we know sometimes come after earthquakes with gas lines, etc. What can you tell me about the damage to your house or the damage that you're hearing about from neighbors, etc.?
Well, I do live in Napa proper in a 1950s type neighborhood. We have chimneys down, up and down the street. I would probably describe the inside of my house as trash. Anything that was standing is not, and everything's off the wall. A lot of heavy furniture down, all the cupboards in the kitchen, dishes out, lots of broken glass, that sort of thing. But everyone inside and in our neighborhood is fine, which I'm thankful for. There was a lot of strong smell of natural gas. We aided the neighbors in turning off the gas at their homes because, as you are probably aware, that's one of the main concerns of firefighters is the aftermath of an earthquake, the gas rupture, a water main rupture, which I understand has happened in downtown Napa. I was just off the phone with the chief of the Napa City Fire Department, Mike Randolph, and he indicated there was a water main break. They have a handful of structure fires in the aftermath of the earthquake that they've been mitigating and responding to. We've heard sirens followed since just after the earthquake, and it's just now kind of beginning to have a little bit of a lull, but there'll be a lot of work today as the sun comes up this morning.
Wow, yeah.
Wow, yeah, I guess I agree with Candy Crowley there on that last clip. And though I noticed I was reading through the comment section while that was playing, and seemed to be several of you who seemed to think the earthquake was a government conspiracy, or somehow the government caused the earthquake. And I think that's taken the false flag stuff a little too far. Well, I think a lot of the false flag stuff goes too far. I'm sorry if I lose subscribers that way. And I do appreciate, however, all of you who kept me company while I showed you the clips. I've been reading your comments along the way. I noticed you're mostly talking to each other and arguing with each other, which I hope you enjoy, because I'm not really going to have time to get into a live discussion with the comments this week. I'm already at the 90-minute mark, and I started a little late, and I think I've got a dinner waiting for me, so I'm going to sign off, and thank you all for joining me. Over 100 of you who watched the program live, and you can tell me what you think about the clips and the different topics and the questions I asked you. And like I said, I should be making a video this week on whether the Fox News blames Ferguson unrest on war on poverty, not war on drugs. That should be up Wednesday or Thursday, hopefully, if things don't get too out of hand in terms of my other commitments. So watch for that, and watch for LiberalViewer Sunday live clip roundup next Sunday at 6:30 p.m. I hope you enjoyed the clips I picked out for you. I hope I helped you end your weekend or start your week a little bit more informed here in the United States and Canada and North and South America, around the world, where I am happy to have so many viewers, both live and as a recorded show. And I guess I'll be seeing you all around